Today we're going to be talking about cell size. And cells have to be small in order to function properly. In order to understand why this is so, we need to talk about a few topics: surface area, volume, and surface area to volume ratio. I've taken the liberty of drawing three cells. These cells are going to be cubes, so they're the same size on all sides. But the concept that we're going to be talking about applies to other shapes too, spheres and other shapes. The reason I chose cubes is because it makes the math easier to follow. So let's go ahead and get started. Surface area. In order to find the surface area of one of these cubes, I want to find the area of one of the faces. And one of the faces is going to be x squared, length times width. And since there are 6 faces to a cube, 6x squared. That's going to give me the surface area. So the surface area of the 1 centimeter cube is going to be 6 centimeters squared. The surface area of this cube, 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 6 is 54. 54 centimeters squared. This cube down here, 5 times 5 is 25, times 6 is 150. 150 centimeters squared. Think of the surface area as the ability of the cell to meet its needs. Because in order to meet its needs, the cell has to diffuse raw materials into the cell, and it has to diffuse wastes that are created through metabolic reactions out of the cell. So the surface area is essentially the ability of a cell to meet its needs. And the needs are twofold. One, get raw materials into the cell and get wastes out of the cell. So the larger the surface area, the greater the ability to get raw materials in and to get rid of waste. So more surface area is a good thing. And as the cell gets larger, the surface area increases. In fact, it's going to increase by the square. Volume, on the other hand, is the cell's needs. As the volume gets larger, the cell's needs get larger. More volume, meaning I need more raw materials to supply that volume. Larger volume also produces larger amounts of waste to get rid of. In order to calculate the volume, length times width times height, or in the case of a cube, x cubed. So volume is going to increase by the cube, and surface area is going to increase by the square. Now let's see if we can see any patterns. Well, let's go ahead and figure out volume first. That's going to be 1 centimeter cubed. It's going to be 27 centimeters cubed. And finally, 5 times 5 times 5 is 125 centimeters cubed. Now let's see if we see any patterns start to emerge here. As the surface area increases, it increases by the square. As the volume increases, it increases by the cube. Now what's going to happen here, at some point, the cell's needs are going to outpace the cell's ability to meet its needs, because the volume is going to increase faster than the surface area increases. So at some point, we're going to run into some problems. The volume is going to exceed the ability of the cells to meet its needs. Let's look at this a different way, with surface area to volume ratio. The surface area of the first cube is 6, and the volume is 1. So that turns out to be 6. That means that the surface area is 6 times larger than the volume. As we move to a larger cell, 54 divided by 27 is 2. Here, the surface area is only twice as large as the volume. And finally, 150 divided by 125, we get 1.2. The surface area is only 1.2 times the size of the volume, or 1.2 times as large as the volume. So we see a pattern. As the cell gets larger, the surface area to volume ratio gets smaller, and the cell's ability to meet its needs, get raw materials in, and get rid of waste goes down. And that puts a limit on the upper size that a cell can get. because eventually the cell is going to run into problems. There's also a lower limit to which a cell can reach, a lower size limit. Think about that. Each cell has a nucleus which manages the cell. The cell has to have a nucleus in a sense in order to survive over a period of time. That nucleus takes up space. Also, a cell has small little factories that do specific jobs called organelles. They also take up space. So as a cell gets smaller and smaller, we find it more and more difficult to fit the nucleus and the other organelles into a certain space. So there is a lower limit to which a cell can reach. So again, these are the rules to cell size. We can't break these rules, but sometimes cells can actually bend the rules just a little bit. Some cells, like nerve cells, such as a nerve cell that goes from my lower back all the way down to my little toe, is about 3 feet long. A large cell, 3 feet long. So we're not allowed to break the cell, break the rules. So how can that cell actually exist? Well, if we look at that cell closely, it turns out that that cell is extremely long and thin for its size. So thin, it's kind of like a thread. If we look at this, look at all the surface area we have here. Lots of surface area. And if you look at the space between that membrane that represents the volume's very small. So even though this cell is very large, very long, the surface area to volume ratio is still very large. We still have a lot of surface area relative to our volume. Flat cells also, same thing. A very flat cell is going to have lots of surface area relative to a small amount of volume. So again, we can't break the rules here of surface area to volume ratio, but we can bend them a little bit. And that's it for cell size.